Emily and David, a seemingly perfect American couple, are expecting their first child. Emily is a loving, supportive wife who left her job to focus on her high-risk pregnancy. David, a successful real estate broker, appears devoted, but in truth, he's emotionally drifting. As Emily becomes more vulnerable, David begins an affair with a younger woman, Vanessa, whom he secretly installs in a luxurious apartment meant for work purposes. Emily senses the distance and uncovers the betrayal through small but undeniable signs. Instead of reacting impulsively, she begins to gather evidence quietly, planning a precise and painful counterattack. The story unfolds across 12 episodes, revealing layers of deceit, emotional abandonment, and buried truths from their past. Emily's intelligence and quiet strength carry her forward. In a final move, she exposes David, files for divorce, and strips him of everything. But when David finally realizes what he lost, it's too late. Emily walks away not just with justice, but her dignity, self-worth, and her child. The morning light filtered through the bedroom curtains, casting a soft glow across the hardwood floor. Emily lay still in bed, her hand resting protectively over her belly. 7 months pregnant and on partial bed rest, she had become acutely aware of the rhythm of her days, the slow pacing of time, the creaks of the old house, and most of all, the changes in her husband David. David used to be attentive, almost to a fault. He would bring her warm milk without asking, hold her feet when she fell asleep on the couch, text her silly memes in the middle of a busy workday. Now his affection had turned mechanical. He still brought her things, still made breakfast, still kissed her goodbye, but it all felt rehearsed, like he was playing a role rather than being with her. She first noticed the difference one evening when he came home late, claiming a meeting had run long. He didn't seem nervous, but his eyes didn't quite meet hers. He smelled of cologne she didn't recognize. Emily didn't say anything. Instead, she watched him closely over the next few days. His phone rarely left his side, and when it buzzed, he would turn it away or step into another room to answer. He laughed less. He touched her less. And when he did, it felt like obligation, not warmth. Emily told herself it was just the stress of preparing for fatherhood. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he didn't know how to express it. But doubt crept in, slowly and insistently. It wasn't just his behavior, it was the silence that surrounded them now. A silence that used to be comfortable, but had become charged with tension. One afternoon, while folding baby clothes, she stared at the tiny socks in her hands and felt a pang of something deeper than sadness. It was loneliness, profound and heavy. She had imagined this part of life would bring them closer, not tear them apart. She thought of how David used to talk to her belly, how he once said he couldn't wait to meet their daughter. Now he barely acknowledged her growing stomach. She noticed how he seemed more interested in his phone during dinner than in her pregnancy updates. He had always been a planner, a man who wanted to be in control, but lately he seemed to be slipping away, drifting into a world she was no longer part of. That night, as he slept beside her, his back turned, she stared at the ceiling and let the silence settle around her. Something was wrong. She didn't know what it was yet, but she could feel it in her bones. A change had come, and it wasn't going away. Emily wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. She needed to understand more, to be sure. But one thing was clear. The man lying beside her wasn't the same man who had once held her hand during their first ultrasound, tears in his eyes. And in the quiet of that realization, something inside her began to shift. Not in anger, not in fear, but in quiet, deliberate awareness. The days moved slowly, marked by routine and observation. Emily, confined mostly to bed, had become a quiet witness to her own life. She had more time to notice things. things that might have once slipped past her in the rush of daily life. Now nothing escaped her. David started leaving earlier than usual, sometimes before sunrise, claiming back-to-back meetings. He returned home late, often with flimsy excuses and vague explanations. When she asked about his day, his answers were rushed, deflective, as if the details no longer mattered. He smiled less and stopped asking how she felt. His attention had shifted. Emily could feel it like a shadow between them. One morning, while reaching for her phone charger in David's side drawer, she found a receipt tucked beneath some documents. It was from a high-end furniture store, an itemized bill for a full bedroom set, dated 2 weeks earlier. She stared at it, her breath caught in her throat. They hadn't discussed buying anything new, especially not something that expensive. When she asked him about it that evening, he looked momentarily startled, then said it was for a model home he was staging for a client. He even laughed lightly, as if she were being silly for asking. Emily nodded, but inside something shifted again. It wasn't the lie, it was how easily it came to him. Later that week, she noticed a charge on their joint credit card for an apartment rental. Downtown. Expensive. Definitely not for a client. It was labeled under his business name, but she knew how David handled real estate deals. He didn't need to use their personal card for business. The charge was recurring, monthly. She stared at the transaction details again and again, her heart pounding, each time hoping she had misread it. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she asked small questions, tested his stories. One night she mentioned a traffic jam in the area where the apartment was listed. Watching him carefully, he barely reacted, just nodded vaguely and mumbled something about construction. She smiled and said nothing, but her silence wasn't ignorance. It was calculation. Emily began to understand the shape of her new reality. David was hiding something. More than that, he was living a separate life. She didn't know who it was for, but she could imagine, and that hurt more than the lies. She spent her evenings alone now, sometimes on the couch with a blanket over her legs, watching the front door, listening for the sound of his car. Sometimes she cried quietly, careful not to let the sobs shake her too much for the baby's sake. Other times she just stared at the wall, numb and hollow. The man she had built a life with, the man she trusted to hold her hand through childbirth, was slipping away into another world. And while she didn't have all the pieces yet, the cracks were forming. The mirror of their marriage, once whole, once clear, was beginning to fracture. But Emily didn't panic. She didn't beg. She watched. She listened. And quietly she began to prepare. It was a Thursday afternoon when Emily asked her friend Grace to stop by. Grace had always been sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who noticed everything, too much sometimes. Emily trusted her instincts, even more than her own at this point. Over tea, she gently asked if Grace had seen David recently, maybe around town. Grace hesitated. There was a flicker of something in her expression, concern, reluctance, maybe guilt. Then she leaned in and said quietly, "I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I saw David downtown last week. He was with someone, a younger woman. They were going into one of those luxury buildings on Maple." Emily's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. She simply nodded and asked for the name of the building. When Grace gave it, Emily recognized it immediately. It was the same address listed on the rental transaction she'd found on the credit card statement. That night, after David left claiming a late showing with a client, Emily called a car and asked the driver to take her downtown. She wasn't supposed to be on her feet much, and every bump in the road made her stomach tighten, but she didn't care. She needed to see it for herself. The building was sleek, modern, with a doorman in a navy suit and a polished lobby that smelled faintly of fresh flowers and lemon polish. Emily stayed across the street, wrapped in a long coat, half hidden beneath a scarf. She waited. An hour passed. The sky darkened. And then she saw her. Vanessa stepped out of the building, laughing into her phone. She was tall, maybe mid-20s, with loose curls and expensive heels. She had the kind of confidence that came from being chosen. Emily didn't need to hear the words. She saw it in the way Vanessa carried herself, the freedom, the lightness. There was no shame, no secrecy. A few minutes later, David walked out behind her. He wasn't touching Vanessa, but his body language was unmistakable, relaxed, familiar. He looked happier than he had in weeks. Emily watched them walk down the street together, her heart pounding with a mix of nausea and clarity. The apartment wasn't for work. It wasn't for staging or clients. It was for her, the mistress. Emily didn't cry. Not then. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She snapped a photo from across the street. David and Vanessa laughing under the street lamp. A perfect, damning image. Then she quietly asked the driver to take her home. That night, David returned late, claiming a client dinner had run longer than expected. Emily didn't question him. She smiled, nodded, and asked how the food was. He kissed her forehead with the same detached warmth he always gave now, then disappeared into the shower. Emily sat at the edge of their bed, the photograph still on her phone, glowing faintly in the dark. She stared at it for a long time, feeling not rage, not even grief, but a strange calm. The truth was in her hands now, and with truth came power. She knew she wouldn't confront him tonight, not tomorrow, maybe not for weeks, but things were no longer uncertain. The apartment was real. The woman was real. The betrayal was real. And so, quietly, deliberately, she began to build the next part of her plan. Vanessa had never seen herself as the other woman. Not really. When she met David at a real estate networking event, he introduced himself with charm and confidence, wearing a tailored suit, speaking with the ease of a man used to getting what he wanted. He mentioned a wife casually, in past tense. My ex, she's back in Connecticut. And Vanessa never questioned it. She was 26, ambitious, and tired of men who played games. David didn't feel like one of them. He was older, successful, and seemed to know exactly what he wanted. He took her to rooftop dinners, sent her flowers to her office, made her feel seen. When he showed her the luxury apartment and told her it was a space for them, she had blushed with excitement. She had never lived like this before. Marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows, a wine fridge. He never stayed the night, and Vanessa told herself that was just how busy men operated. He said he had clients in the morning, said he was still finalizing the divorce, that it was messy because of finances. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? There were moments, though, when doubt crept in. Once she found a pacifier in the glove compartment of his car. Another time he flinched when she asked if he wanted kids. But he always had explanations, smooth and ready. My niece left that in the car, he had said. And yeah, maybe one day, he had added distractedly, when she brought up children. Vanessa didn't push. She didn't want to seem insecure. She had been in toxic relationships before and prided herself on being the cool, confident girlfriend now. She told her friends about David, about the apartment, about the places he took her. She didn't tell them he was married because, in her mind, he wasn't. Not really. But as weeks passed, she began to notice small gaps in his attention. Sometimes he would go silent for hours, claiming client emergencies. He never took her calls after 9 p.m. He refused to take selfies with her, even in private. And one night, when she asked if they could go away for the weekend, he looked uneasy and said, "Things are complicated right now." Still, he paid the rent. He brought gifts. He came over often enough to reassure her. She told herself not to be paranoid. One evening, while scrolling through social media, she found herself searching his name, not something she normally did. A few clicks later, she landed on an old tagged photo. It was David smiling beside a woman who looked about her age, cradling a visible baby bump. Vanessa stared at the screen. The photo was dated only 2 months ago. There was no caption, but the truth hit her like a wave. He wasn't separated. He wasn't divorced. He was a husband and soon a father. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. Everything suddenly felt smaller. Her apartment, her confidence, her image of herself, the pacifier, the missed calls, the way he never spent the night. She curled up on the couch, trying to decide whether she felt more used or more foolish. But even then, a part of her clung to hope. Maybe he had his reasons. Maybe he really was planning to leave. Maybe, just maybe, she meant more to him than convenience. Vanessa didn't know it yet, but the illusion was beginning to unravel. And on the other side of that unraveling stood a woman she'd never met, a wife who already knew far more than she let on. Emily had never been one to act without understanding. She believed in precision, in timing, in listening more than speaking. In the weeks that followed her quiet discovery outside the apartment building, she channeled all her pain into focus. Her emotions, hurt, betrayal, anger, were folded neatly behind a calm exterior. Every conversation with David became a subtle test. Every interaction was a moment to observe. She began taking notes, receipts, emails, calendar events. Every inconsistency was recorded. She saved screenshots of financial transactions and phone records, all neatly organized in a private folder on her tablet. When David left his laptop open one night, she quickly mirrored the contents to a backup drive. She didn't even have to search long. Vanessa's name appeared in a reservation confirmation for a weekend getaway. David had never mentioned the trip. Still, Emily said nothing. She played the role of the quiet, devoted wife with perfect grace. She asked about his work. She smiled when he brought her takeout. She even laughed at his tired jokes. But inside, she was building a case, not just for her heart, for her future, for her child. She met with a lawyer on a quiet afternoon when David was out of town. Her doctor had approved a few short outings, and she used the time carefully. The attorney, a woman named Karen with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, listened to everything. She explained how the prenuptial agreement, under state law, would be voided if adultery could be proven. Financial assets, properties, retirement funds. Emily would have grounds to claim nearly all of it, including sole custody. "You've been smart," Karen said softly. "Keep collecting. Don't confront him until you're ready." Emily nodded. She felt no triumph in hearing it, only resolve. That evening she lay beside David and watched him scroll through his phone, the blue light casting shadows across his face. She wondered if he could feel it, the shift in her silence, the growing weight of everything left unsaid. But if he did, he didn't show it. He leaned over, kissed her forehead, and mumbled something about an early meeting. She watched him sleep that night. Really watched. The lines near his eyes, the curve of his mouth, the rhythm of his breathing. She had loved him, deeply, completely. And yet, as she stared at the man beside her, she realized something painful and clear. She didn't recognize him anymore. Whatever had once bound them had been slowly replaced by something colder, more calculated. But Emily wasn't broken. Not anymore. Her tears had dried. Her hands no longer trembled. What remained was a kind of quiet strength, an armor forged through heartbreak. She was no longer searching for answers. She was preparing for the ending. It was a Sunday morning, warm and cloudless. David stood by the kitchen counter, sipping coffee, scrolling through his phone. Emily watched him from the dining table, her hands cradling a cup of chamomile tea. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Everything about her had become more careful lately, her words, her steps, her silence. She waited until he looked up. "I've been thinking," she said gently, "maybe we should try couples counseling, just to help us reconnect before the baby comes." David blinked, surprised. He glanced at her, then back at his phone, clearly thrown off. Counseling? Are we that bad? Emily smiled faintly. No, I just think we've both been busy, disconnected, and I want us to be stronger. For the baby. He hesitated. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened. I mean, sure, he said eventually, rubbing the back of his neck. If you think it'll help. I do, she replied, eyes steady. Just a few sessions. She already had the therapist picked out, a licensed counselor who specialized in betrayal trauma and marital conflict. Emily had booked the appointment weeks ago, waiting for the right moment. David, unaware he was walking into a room full of carefully stacked cards, simply agreed, thinking it was just another of her hormonal whims. The session was scheduled for Tuesday evening. David showed up wearing a crisp shirt, his expression polite but distracted. He made small talk with the therapist, cracked a joke or two, trying to ease the tension. Emily said little. She let him talk first. He spoke of stress at work, pressure to provide, exhaustion from long hours. He didn't mention Vanessa, didn't mention the apartment or the lies. Emily listened without interruption, her hands resting gently on her lap. When it was her turn, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She looked at the therapist and then at David, her voice steady. I think David is struggling with guilt, she said. He's been having an affair for several months. I've known about it. I've seen the receipts, the photos, the apartment. The woman. The silence that followed was sharp and suffocating. David froze. His face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Emily didn't look away. I haven't confronted you until now, she continued softly, because I needed to protect myself and our child, but I won't pretend anymore. The therapist remained calm, asking David if he had anything to say. He stammered, stumbled, eyes darting from Emily to the floor. I didn't mean for it to go that far. It was a mistake. I was going to end it. Emily almost laughed at the cliché, but her face didn't change. She wasn't here to argue. She was here to let him know the game was over. On the ride home, the car was silent. David didn't speak, didn't touch her. Emily stared out the window, her reflection calm and unreadable in the glass. She knew he was unraveling inside, trying to rewrite the story in his head, wondering how much she truly knew. But she had already planned the next steps. Every piece had been set with care. He had built his lie brick by brick. Now she would take it down, quietly, strategically, completely. After the therapy session, David tried to act normal. He didn't apologize that night. He didn't beg. Instead, he disappeared into his office, door shut, lights off. The silence in the house deepened, pressing against the walls like a storm that hadn't yet broken. Emily moved through the rooms quietly, hands resting on her belly, her mind sharper than ever. 3 days passed. David didn't mention Vanessa. He didn't mention the affair. He avoided it like a wound he refused to clean, hoping if he ignored it long enough, it might just stop bleeding. But Emily didn't need his words anymore. She already had everything she needed. On the 4th day, she received a message from a burner account on social media. The profile had no photo, no name, but the message was unmistakable. He said he was going to leave you. I guess he lied to both of us. Attached was a photo. Vanessa sitting in the apartment, a soft throw draped over her legs, holding a wine glass, looking directly into the camera. Emily stared at it for a long moment. Then she smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because it finally confirmed what she already knew. She didn't respond to the message. She didn't need to. That night, David returned home late. He smelled like cologne again, not the one he used to wear for her. He moved with practiced guilt, eyes darting, voice low. He avoided her gaze, muttered something about being tired, and headed straight to the shower. Emily waited until the water stopped running. Then she called out calmly, "Did you enjoy your evening with Vanessa?" The silence that followed was heavy, When he stepped out of the bathroom, towel in hand, his expression was unreadable. "I told you, it's over," he said. "Then why is she still in the apartment you pay for?" she asked, her voice almost kind. "Why is she sending me photos? Why does she think you promised her something?" David exhaled sharply, frustration rising in his chest. "She's lying. She's trying to get back at me. She's just jealous." Emily nodded slowly. "And what are you? Caught? Cornered? Or just disappointed you didn't get away with it?" He didn't answer. He turned away, ran a hand through his hair. But Emily had seen enough, not just of him, but of herself, in the mirror, in the quiet hours of the night, in the strength it took not to fall apart. "I'm not angry anymore," she said softly. "That's what scares you, isn't it? You don't know what I'll do next because I'm not yelling, I'm not crying. I'm done with that." David turned to her, a flicker of panic rising. "Emily, please. We have a child on the way." "Yes," she interrupted, calm and firm. "And she deserves a mother who values herself, and a father who doesn't lie. Unfortunately, she'll only get one of those." David took a step toward her. She didn't move. "You broke something in me," she whispered, "but you also woke something up. I know who I am now. I know what I will and will not tolerate." For the first time since the affair began, David saw it, the distance in her eyes, the solid wall between them, not built from revenge, built from clarity. Later that night, as he lay beside her, quiet and restless, Emily stared up at the ceiling, one hand resting on her belly. She wasn't planning revenge. She was planning freedom. The breaking point had come, and she had not shattered. She had simply changed. The air in the house had changed. It was still, but not peaceful. Tense, but not chaotic. Emily moved with a quiet certainty, her body growing heavier as the due date neared, while her mind became sharper. David tiptoed around her now, less out of guilt and more out of fear. He could feel something coming, though he couldn't name it. Emily had already made all the necessary calls. She met with her attorney again, finalizing every detail of the divorce papers. She reviewed financial statements, ensuring everything was documented, every transfer, every suspicious withdrawal, every unexplained business expense. Karen, the attorney, was impressed. "You've done all the work already," she said. "He won't see it coming." That was the point. Emily also had her hospital bag packed, not just for labor, but for everything that would follow. She arranged a temporary place to stay through a friend, secured funds in a private account, and had the custody filing ready. She even visited a therapist, not for answers, but to make sure she was emotionally prepared for what came next. She didn't want to just win, she wanted peace. David, meanwhile, was unraveling. He stayed out later, but came home with tension in his shoulders and questions in his eyes. He kept waiting for another confrontation, another explosion. But Emily gave him nothing. No tears, no accusations, just politeness, controlled distance. That silence made him restless. One evening, he tried to initiate closeness. He placed his hand on her back while she was folding baby clothes, his touch tentative. "Do you want to talk?" he asked. Emily folded a tiny onesie and set it gently on the bed. "No, David," she said without turning around. "I've already done all the talking I needed to do." He lingered, watching her, searching for any opening. There was none. She had closed that door quietly, completely. Later that night, while he slept, she scrolled through her phone one last time, checking backups, legal documents, the photos of him and Vanessa saved in a hidden album. She didn't need to look at them anymore, but she did, not out of pain, but out of confirmation. This was real. This had happened, and it would end. She placed her phone down and exhaled, not from exhaustion, but from clarity. The weight of indecision had lifted. What was coming was no longer something she feared. It was something she welcomed. The storm was near. But inside her, all was calm. It was a quiet Friday evening when Emily chose to end it. The dinner table was neatly set, her effort, though minimal, still intact. A soft roast in the oven, vegetables steaming on the stove, and warm bread resting on the counter. The house smelled like comfort, like tradition, like a home that was being gently handed over to its past. David arrived late, as usual, offering a weak apology as he slipped off his shoes and loosened his tie. She said nothing, just gestured toward the table. They ate in near silence. Emily chewed slowly, thoughtfully, occasionally glancing down at her plate. David, clearly uncomfortable, picked at his food, sensing a shift, but not quite ready for what was about to come. After dinner, Emily asked him to sit with her in the living room. He followed without question, the unease settling in his chest. She moved with grace, her pregnancy now unmistakable, her posture calm, eyes unreadable. She sat across from him and opened a folder. Inside, a printed list of every transaction to the apartment, photos of Vanessa in the luxury condo, screenshots of text messages he had failed to delete from his cloud backup, a timeline of every lie. David stared at it, frozen. "You always thought I was fragile," Emily began, her voice even. "Because I was pregnant, because I stayed quiet, because I waited. But I wasn't weak, David. I was preparing." He opened his mouth, but she raised a hand. Not to silence him out of anger, but because words weren't needed. Not anymore. "I gave you the benefit of the doubt for as long as I could," she continued. "But you weren't just unfaithful. You were careless, cruel. You let her sit in an apartment we paid for while I lay in bed, holding our child." David's jaw clenched, his eyes watered, not from empathy, but from fear. "Emily, I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to fix it. You thought I would never leave," she said quietly. "You thought I would always be here, waiting for you to grow up." She handed him an envelope, inside the initial divorce filing, with terms clearly outlined. She would retain full custody, the house, a portion of his assets, and the proof of his affair in case he contested anything. "I've already filed," she said. "You'll be served officially by Monday. You can sign or fight. Either way, I'm ready." David looked down at the papers, disbelief tightening his face. "You're doing this now? Before the baby comes?" "No," she said softly. "I'm doing this because the baby is coming." She rose slowly, steadying herself as she stood. "I won't raise my daughter in a house built on lies. I won't let her grow up watching her mother shrink herself for a man who doesn't know what he wants." David stood, pleading now. Please, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I didn't mean to lose you." "But you did," she whispered. "Not today, not last week. You lost me the moment you chose her, and kept choosing her. Every time you came home and lied to my face." He stepped toward her, but she stepped back. "I won't fight," she added. "I'm not here for revenge. I just want peace. For me, for our child, and for whatever you decide to become after this." With that, she walked past him, up the stairs, leaving him alone in the stillness of a house he no longer belonged to. And for the first time, David understood. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was closure. The days that followed were swift and unforgiving. David, once so confident in his ability to control every outcome, found himself cornered in ways he hadn't imagined. The legal documents Emily had handed him were real, ironclad and thoroughly prepared. Every detail had been accounted for, every loophole sealed. His infidelity, documented and undeniable, shattered the prenuptial agreement he once believed would protect him. He tried to reach out, at first through calls and texts, pleading, bargaining. Then came the guilt-laced voicemails, a mix of desperation and denial. Emily didn't answer. She read every message but never responded. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. She no longer had anything to say to the man who had built his second life, while pretending to protect their first. His attorney, a former college friend, looked over the case with a heavy sigh. "She's got you, David. Dead to rights. She has the proof, the timing, and now public sympathy. If you contest this, you'll lose everything, including your reputation. Settle." Quietly. David swallowed hard. The realization was setting in, slowly, painfully, that he hadn't just gambled on love, he had gambled on someone far smarter and more resilient than he ever gave her credit for. The apartment he'd rented for Vanessa was empty days later. She left without warning. No note, no goodbye. The key was dropped off with the concierge wrapped in a silk scarf. He tried calling her once. Her number had been disconnected. In a matter of weeks, David lost nearly everything. The house was awarded to Emily. She chose to keep it, not because she loved it anymore, but because it was her daughter's home now. Full custody was granted without dispute, and David was signed visitation pending psychological evaluation. Child support was calculated strictly by the books. His finances, once expansive and fluid, were now burdened by court orders and legal fees. His real estate firm, co-owned with silent investors, began distancing itself from him. Whispers had started, clients canceling, associates pulling away. His fall wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, systematic, precise, exactly like the woman he had underestimated. The final court date was brief. Emily stood beside her attorney, calm, steady, her belly round beneath a soft gray dress. She didn't look at David. Not once. When the judge signed the final decree, she simply nodded, thanked the court, and walked out, free, unshaken. David remained seated for several minutes after the hearing ended, staring at the empty space where she had stood. He didn't cry. There were no words left, just the echo of everything he'd lost, and the cruel simplicity of how easily it could have been prevented. All he had to do was choose her. Instead, he had chosen lies, and now Emily had chosen freedom. David sat alone in the empty apartment he had moved into weeks ago. The walls were bare, the windows uncovered. Boxes remained unpacked in corners, their contents a mix of things he couldn't bear to sort through. The silence was oppressive. No sound of keys turning at the door, no quiet footsteps in the hallway, no soft laughter from another room. Just him, and the weight of everything he had destroyed. At first he told himself he needed time, that Emily just needed space, that eventually she would forgive him. But as the days stretched into weeks and the custody schedule arrived without discussion, the reality settled in. She wasn't coming back. He thought of her constantly, not just who she was now, but who she used to be. The way she smiled during slow mornings, the way she'd press her face into his chest after a long day, the way she had looked up at him during their first ultrasound, eyes filled with hope and fear and wonder. That version of Emily was gone. He hadn't just hurt her, he had erased the part of her that once belonged to him. The apartment felt like a punishment. It was everything he had thought he wanted. Space, freedom, escape. But it was hollow. His calls went unanswered. Friends grew distant. Vanessa had vanished entirely, leaving behind nothing but silence. She had blocked him on everything after the divorce went public. The moment the money began slipping, so did her affection. He tried to distract himself with work, but even that was unraveling. Clients questioned his integrity. His firm had quietly asked him to step back from the public eye. Rumors traveled fast in a tight market, especially when betrayal made for better gossip than business. One evening, he opened the baby registry link Emily had once shared with him. It was still active. A soft blue blanket was listed near the top. He remembered her picking it out in a store, holding it to her cheek with a small smile. He had barely paid attention. He had been answering texts from Vanessa. Now he stared at that same blanket through a screen, unable to touch it, unable to be part of the life he was supposed to build. That regret, slow, acidic, burned deeper than any consequence the court could have handed him. He wanted to right her, not to beg, but to explain. But what was left to say? She had seen the truth in full, and she had still walked away. Not with bitterness, not with vengeance, just with grace. And that, more than anything, haunted him, because it meant she no longer needed him, not to co-parent, not to love, not even to forgive. She had found peace in the ashes he left behind, and he, who once thought he held all the power, was left only with memories. Regret wasn't loud. It didn't shout or rage, it whispered. And David heard it every night as he lay in the dark, imagining the sound of a baby's laugh in a home that no longer belonged to him. Spring arrived quietly. The trees outside Emily's home bloomed with soft pink blossoms, and the air carried that gentle warmth that always reminded her of fresh starts. She stood on the porch one morning, hand resting on her belly, which now felt heavier with each passing day. The baby kicked gently, as if nudging her forward. She had just returned from her final prenatal appointment, alone, but not lonely. Inside, the nursery was ready, walls painted in calming tones, shelves lined with carefully chosen books, tiny clothes folded with love. Every detail, from the handmade mobile to the quiet rocker by the window, had been prepared by Emily for her child. There was no trace of David in that room, not his touch, not his influence, and that was intentional. She didn't carry bitterness, not anymore. The divorce had been painful, yes, but also liberating. In the months since she walked out of that courtroom, Emily had begun rediscovering parts of herself that had long been buried. The quiet strength, the steady grace, the unshakable instinct that had once made her believe she could survive anything. And she had. She had gone back to writing, short essays, small stories, reflections on motherhood and betrayal, strength and softness. Her words carried weight online, and slowly a following grew. People reached out, women who had been through similar heartbreaks, who saw in Emily a mirror of their own resilience. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. When the baby came, late at night, after hours of labor and quiet pain, Emily held her son to her chest with tears streaming down her cheeks. He was perfect. Tiny fingers curled around hers, eyes blinking in soft confusion at the world. She named him Jonah, a name that felt like a journey, a storm, and a second chance. David found out through a mutual friend. He sent a gift, a silver rattle in a blue box, with a note written in shaky handwriting. "I'll always regret what I lost. I hope he grows up surrounded by the love I failed to give." Emily didn't reply. She placed the box in a drawer, neither accepted nor destroyed, just put away, like a relic of a life that no longer fit. As weeks passed, she found herself smiling more easily. She laughed again. Sometimes she cried, but not out of sadness, just release. Healing wasn't linear. It never was. But she was moving forward, one step at a time, holding Jonah close. One afternoon, as the sun poured through the windows and Jonah napped in her arms, Emily whispered, "We're going to be just fine, you and me." And she believed it. The betrayal that once shattered her had become the soil from which something stronger had grown. Not revenge, not triumph, but peace. She didn't need a perfect ending, just a true one. And this quiet, honest life was exactly that.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.